Hi, Lewis. Are you... Sorry? Yeah, no problem. Thanks. Are you still smiling? You were smiling earlier in the weekend. Are you still smiling today after that first day?
Yeah, it was not the best qualifying, but I felt solid all weekend. I've been really happy in the car and feeling super motivated. And I think in Q1 was up until end of Q1 on the medium tire was feeling great. I was obviously it was third or fourth with just the medium tire, so I was feeling solid. And then when we got into Q2, we had some problems with the engine and deployment, and it kind of then threw a bunch of spanners in the mix, and we really struggled then to just execute and get the best out of it after that. So I think if things hadn't been an issue, I think we probably could have been fighting for third or fourth. So I don't think we could keep up, get anywhere in Mercedes, but still, lots of work to progress to be made.
The Australian Grand Prix classification not only left one result on the grid, it left something much more disturbing in the paddock. The message that Lewis Hamilton sent after getting out of the Ferrari. His words were not a simple reaction to a complicated qualifying session. They were a declaration of intent that revealed the pressure that Ferrari is under, the mental change of the 7-time champion, and the enormous challenge that faces him in this new stage. But what if I told you that the most shocking thing about the Australian Grand Prix was not the pole, nor the qualifying times, but what Lewis Hamilton said right after getting out of the Ferrari? Because his words left the paddock completely silent. Hamilton spoke about his new mentality, made it clear that he is no longer the same driver that we saw suffer in his last years, and sent a message so direct that many within Formula One interpreted it as a warning. Qualifying for the Australian Grand Prix not only marked the real start of the season, it also represented the first moment in which Lewis Hamilton faced the reality of his new project with Ferrari under the absolute pressure of a Formula One weekend. Until that moment, everything had been preparation, testing, simulations, and optimistic statements. But when the moment of truth arrived at Albert Park, Hamilton came face to face with the magnitude of the challenge he had decided to take on by wearing red. And this change of stage is not a simple transfer of equipment. For Hamilton, it means completely rebuilding his competitive environment after difficult years at Mercedes, where at various times he found himself a frustrated driver, limited by an unresponsive car and forced to fight simply to stay in the fight. That version of Hamilton, marked by frustration and helplessness, is precisely the one he now insists he has left behind. In his own words, the mentality with which he faces this season is radically different and ensures that the world of Formula One will no longer see the same driver who appeared in the hardest moments of his previous stage. This mental change is a fundamental piece to understand why his statements after the classification have generated such an impact. Hamilton didn't speak like a driver who is simply adapting to a new car. He spoke like someone who feels that this project has to work no matter what. In his interventions, he made it clear that the adaptation process during the previous year was extremely demanding, describing it as a very steep learning curve in which many things had to be learned on the fly. However, now he assures that both he and Ferrari arrive much more prepared to face the new technical cycle of Formula One. That context is what makes each of Hamilton's words so much more meaningful. Because when a 7-time world champion talks about a new mentality, about leaving his previous versions behind and starting a completely different stage, he is actually sending a direct message to the rest of the grid. Hamilton wants everyone to understand that he did not come to Ferrari to spend his last years competing without pressure. Their goal is much more ambitious: to rebuild a winning project and fight for the championship again. For this reason, after qualifying in Australia, his words were not interpreted as a simple reflection on the performance of the car or the result of the session. Inside the paddock, many began to read between the lines of something much deeper. Hamilton is setting the tone for his new stage at Ferrari from the first weekend. And if his speech continues along those lines, what we are seeing could be the beginning of one of the most intense stories of the coming years in Formula One. After qualifying in Albert Park, it was time for Lewis Hamilton to face the microphones. And that was where the statements began that quickly began to spread throughout the paddock. It was not an explosive reaction or a direct complaint against Ferrari or against the car, but that is precisely why his words attracted so much attention. Hamilton spoke with a mixture of calm and determination that made it clear that what he is experiencing at the beginning of this stage is not simply a normal adaptation, but the beginning of something much bigger within his career. One of the phrases that generated the most impact was when the Briton made it clear that the version of himself that we saw in recent years no longer exists. Hamilton explained that his mentality has completely changed and that he has left behind that stage in which he seemed frustrated by the lack of competitiveness. According to him, everything he experienced previously served as learning, and now he is determined to face this new challenge with a completely different attitude. It was then that he launched that phrase that resonated throughout the paddock. He assured that people will not see that person again, suggesting that the Hamilton who arrives at Ferrari is much stronger mentally than the one who finished his previous stage. But his statements did not remain solely in the emotional field. Hamilton also talked about goals, and that's where his message became even more forceful. The Briton was direct in stating that his goal is to fight for the championship as soon as possible with Ferrari. He did not talk about long reconstructions or projects many years in the future. His speech was that of a driver who wants results from the beginning of the new technical cycle of Formula One. This immediately increased the pressure on the Maranello team, because when a 7-time world champion publicly declares that his goal is the title, each result begins to be measured under that standard. Hamilton also wanted to make it clear that, at least from his side, there are no excuses. He explained that he arrives in excellent physical condition, that the preparation work has been very intense, and that the time accumulated in the tests has been essential to understand the car and the project. With that message, he was sending another very clear signal. If things don't work out, it won't be because of a lack of preparation or commitment on your part. Within the paddock, these words began to be interpreted as more than simple post-qualifying statements. For many engineers, journalists, and drivers, Hamilton was drawing a line from the first Grand Prix of the season. A line that makes it clear that his time with Ferrari will not be a smooth transition, but rather a total commitment to return to the top of Formula One. And when a driver with his history launches that type of message so early in the championship, everyone understands that something important is beginning to be built behind those words. As the hours passed after qualifying, Lewis Hamilton's words began to be analyzed in much more depth within the paddock. What at first seemed simply a motivational statement began to be interpreted as something much more important, a clear sign of the type of leadership that Hamilton wants to impose on Ferrari from the first moment. And that detail is key to understanding why his message had such an impact on the Formula One environment. Ferrari is not just any team in the championship. It is the team with the most history, with the most media pressure, and with a constant expectation of success that often becomes an enormous burden for drivers and engineers. Hamilton knows this perfectly, and that is why his statements were not coincidental. When he talks about a new mentality, when he insists that he has left behind the most negative versions of himself, and when he sets the fight for the championship as a direct objective, he is actually sending an internal message as strong as the external one. This project must work. In addition, there is another factor that makes all of this have even more weight. Hamilton does not arrive at Ferrari as just another driver on the grid. He arrives as one of the most successful drivers in the history of the sport, someone who has won multiple world championships and who knows exactly what a team needs to build a winning project. Therefore, when he declares that he believes more than ever in the project that Ferrari is building, that phrase is also interpreted as a shared responsibility between him and the team. If this project is successful, it will be one of the biggest stories in modern Formula One. But if it doesn't work, the pressure that will be generated around Ferrari will be enormous. The most interesting thing is that this message comes at a key moment for the category. Formula One is entering a new technical stage with regulation changes that have largely reset the competitive order. In that context, Hamilton seems convinced that Ferrari can take advantage of this opportunity to return to the top. That conviction is precisely what led him to make the decision to join the team, and in his own words, he believes in that project even more today than when he signed the contract. Therefore, what began as simple statements after qualifying for the Australian Grand Prix ended up becoming something much bigger. Hamilton not only talked about a qualifying session, he talked about the beginning of a new stage in his career. A stage in which he wants to show that he still has the ability to lead a winning project and fight for the world title again. And if his words really reflect the mentality with which he faces this season, then the message is clear for the entire grid. The Hamilton who arrives at Ferrari is not here to say goodbye to Formula One. He is here to conquer it again. In the end, the Australian Grand Prix classification left much more than just a starting grid. He left a statement that quickly began to resonate throughout the paddock, and that perfectly reflects the moment that Lewis Hamilton is experiencing in his career. His words were not those of a driver who is beginning a quiet period or simply adapting to a new team. They were those of someone who arrives with a very clear mission and with the determination to show that he can still mark an era in Formula One. When Hamilton talks about a completely different mentality, when he assures that the driver we saw frustrated in previous stages will no longer appear again, and when he sets the fight for the championship with Ferrari as his goal, he is sending a message that goes far beyond a press conference. He is setting the tone for his entire new stage in Maranello, and at the same time he is setting the bar of expectations extremely high for the entire project. Because at Ferrari every word weighs, Every result is analyzed in detail and every promise generates enormous pressure. And Hamilton knows it. That is why his statements after Australia's qualification were not only impactful because of what he said, but because of what they imply for the team's immediate future. If the project works, we could be witnessing one of the most historic chapters in Formula One, the rebirth of Ferrari at the hands of one of the greatest drivers of all time. But if things don't go as expected, the pressure that will be generated around the team will be gigantic. What is clear is that the message has already been sent. Hamilton has made it clear that he has not come to Ferrari to participate, nor to close his sporting career quietly. He has arrived with the intention of building something great and fighting again for the top of the championship. And if his words after qualifying in Australia really reflect the mentality with which he approaches this stage, then the season ahead could be much more intense than many imagined. Let me know in the comments what you think of everything.